His maid was stealing food from his fridge. The truth behind it left him speechless. James Howard had never been one to question the routines in his life. As an executive with a demanding job, everything about his world ran like a well-oiled machine. His high-rise apartment was a sanctuary, an escape from the world of meetings and constant emails. His maid, Alara, had been with him for several months. Quiet, polite, and efficient, she kept the apartment spotless and never caused any trouble. He barely noticed her most days, just the occasional exchange of pleasantries when she handed him a cup of coffee or tidied up his office. But recently, something strange had been happening. The food in his fridge seemed to disappear faster than it should. His favorite snacks, fresh vegetables, and expensive cuts of meat, gone by the end of the week. It started with small things, like a missing sandwich or an empty carton of milk. But soon it became more noticeable. It wasn't just food, it was the good food, the things he enjoyed the most after a long day at work. At first, James brushed it off. Maybe he was eating more than he thought, or perhaps he had accidentally eaten something without remembering. But when it kept happening, he began to suspect something wasn't right. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, James returned home later than usual. He had been buried in meetings all day, but his mind kept drifting back to the disappearing food. His fridge had been nearly empty when he had left that morning, but now it looked almost the same as it had earlier in the week. Half of what he had bought was gone. He grabbed a bottle of water and opened the fridge door, scanning the shelves. His eyes landed on a half-eaten steak and some bread, crumbs scattered across the shelf. It was a clear sign someone had been eating, and it wasn't him. Curiosity gnawed at him, and he waited. He didn't know why, but he needed to see if his suspicions were true. He stood quietly in the living room, listening for any noise. The apartment was still. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Then he heard a soft shuffle of footsteps from the kitchen. He moved closer, silently peeking around the corner. There she was, Alara, standing in front of the open fridge, taking a piece of cheese. She hadn't noticed him yet. She looked guilty, her eyes darting nervously as she pulled the food out. Her actions were careful, deliberate, like someone who had been caught doing something wrong but wasn't quite ready to admit it. James couldn't believe what he was seeing. He was stunned, caught off guard. This wasn't just a small mistake or a moment of weakness, it was intentional. He felt a rush of anger surge through him. "Alara," he called out sharply, stepping into the kitchen. She froze, the cheese still in her hand, her face pale. I'm sorry, mister." "Howard," she stammered, not meeting his eyes. "I didn't mean to, I'll clean up." James couldn't hide the frustration in his voice. "What's going on? Why are you taking food from my fridge?" She didn't immediately answer. Instead, she glanced down at the floor, avoiding his gaze. The silence between them felt heavy. James had no idea what to make of this. Alara had always been reliable. She was neat, orderly, and quiet. This was so out of character for her. I didn't have a choice," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. James frowned. "What do you mean, didn't have a choice? You can't just take what isn't yours." "I had no other option," Alara said, her voice shaking now. She put the cheese back into the fridge but kept her back to him, her hands still trembling. "Please understand." James took a step closer, trying to make sense of it all. "Understand? Alara, you've been stealing from me. And for what? What could possibly make you think this is okay?" I have to do it," she said again, her words cryptic, almost as if she was speaking to herself. Her eyes were distant, as if she were lost in thought, and there was something in her gaze that James couldn't quite place, a mixture of fear and desperation. He was about to say more when something about her tone made him pause. It wasn't the usual apology or excuse he was expecting. There was something deeper, something darker at play here. James opened his mouth, ready to press her for answers, but she suddenly turned to face him, her eyes wide with what seemed like genuine fear. "They're watching me," she said softly. James blinked, unsure of what she meant. "Who's watching you? What are you talking about?" Alara stepped back, her face pale. Her body language screamed anxiety, her hands clutching at the edges of her apron. "I can't tell you everything." "Please, you won't understand." James stared at her, his anger melting into confusion. What was going on? This wasn't just some simple mistake. Something far more serious was happening, and he was standing right in the middle of it. He was no fool. There was more to Alara than met the eye. She glanced at the door nervously, as if expecting someone to come through at any moment. Then, without another word, she turned and hurried toward the kitchen exit, almost stumbling in her haste. James was left standing there, staring after her, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The words, "They're watching me," kept echoing in his mind. Who was she talking about? Who could possibly be monitoring her in his apartment? James felt a deep sense of unease crawl up his spine. This was no longer just about food being taken from his fridge. This was something much bigger, and he was going to get to the bottom of it. James could hardly shake the events of the previous night from his mind. Alara's strange confession had left him more confused than ever. She was hiding something, something bigger than food disappearing from his fridge. The way she had looked at him with that pleading, fearful expression, the way she had said, "They're watching me," haunted him. What did she mean by that? Who was she really? The following day, James went about his usual routine, but his mind was far from the office. He couldn't focus on his work, his mind replaying the conversation over and over again. Who could be watching Alara, and why? It didn't make sense. She was just a maid. Nothing more, nothing less, or so he thought. After finishing his work for the day, James decided he needed answers. He couldn't let this slide. Alara's actions, the way she had practically run away after their brief conversation, were too strange to ignore. He had to find out what was really going on. As night fell and his apartment grew quiet, James quietly went about his plan. He waited until Alara had left for her usual evening errand. She often stepped out to buy some groceries or take care of personal business. He had noticed her leaving the apartment just before dusk the previous few days, always in a hurry, always with a sense of urgency that seemed out of place for a maid simply running errands. This time, James didn't stay inside. Instead, he followed her. He didn't know exactly where she was going, but he had to find out. He kept his distance, making sure not to let her notice that he was trailing behind her. Alara moved quickly through the streets of the city, her pace never slowing, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings. James followed her through several blocks, his curiosity growing with each step. He hadn't expected her to head down the alleyways and side streets. It seemed like she was deliberately avoiding the main roads, as if she didn't want to be seen. His heart raced as he turned the corner and saw her meet with someone who was not human. Standing in the shadow of a building, James watched as Alara stopped in front of a tall, alien figure. The being was at least 7 feet tall, with smooth, shimmering blue skin that reflected the streetlights. Its eyes were dark, unblinking, and cold, and its body was encased in sleek metallic armor that seemed almost too advanced for any human-made technology James had ever seen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The alien was towering over Alara, who looked almost small in comparison, but she didn't seem afraid. In fact, she looked almost relieved. James couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a real alien standing right in front of him. He crouched low, hiding behind a dumpster to stay out of sight. His mind raced as he tried to process everything that was happening. Alara had been sneaking food from his fridge because of this. And who was the alien? Was this part of some kind of underground alien operation? Or was Alara involved in something more dangerous than he could ever imagine? He leaned in closer, trying to catch their conversation. It was hard to hear clearly, but he could make out snippets of what they were saying. "You have the supplies?" the alien asked in a low, guttural voice. Alara nodded quickly, holding out a small bag filled with what appeared to be food. "I got everything you asked for. I've been careful. No one suspects anything." The alien took the bag from her, examining it briefly before nodding in approval. "Good. The others will be pleased. You've done well." James felt a wave of confusion and disbelief wash over him. Who were these others they were talking about? And what did they need all this food for? He had never considered that Alara might be involved in something more than just cleaning his apartment. But now, seeing her interacting with this alien like it was normal, like it was someone she knew well, it was clear there was much more to her than met the eye. Before James could gather his thoughts, the alien said something that made his blood run cold. "You should leave soon. The Empire is watching. If they find out what you've been doing, they'll send someone after you." The words echoed in James' mind as he leaned back, careful not to be noticed. "The Empire? Alara," the alien continued, "you are one of us now. There's no turning back." Alara's voice was soft but determined. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to help." James felt his heart hammer in his chest. What was she talking about? Who was us? And what did she mean about the Empire watching her? His thoughts were interrupted when the alien turned to leave, its towering figure disappearing into the shadows. Alara stood there for a moment, as if lost in thought, before hurrying away in the opposite direction. James stayed in his crouch, trying to make sense of the scene he had just witnessed. The alien empire, what did that mean for him? Was Alara in some sort of trouble? And more importantly, was he in danger too? He watched her disappear into the night, his mind swirling with questions. He had to find out more. There was no way he was going to let this go now. But how? What could he do with the information he had? James knew he needed to confront Alara again, but this time it would be different. He wasn't going to let her hide behind vague excuses or cryptic words. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he got them. The next day, when Alara arrived to clean the apartment, James didn't waste any time. He called her into the living room as soon as she entered, his expression serious. She looked startled at the change in his tone. "Sit down, Alara," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Alara hesitated for a moment but obeyed, taking a seat across from him. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and she seemed nervous. James took a deep breath. "I saw you last night," he said bluntly. "I saw you with the alien, and I heard what you said." "Who are you really, Alara?" For a moment, Alara didn't say anything. Her eyes darted nervously around the room as if searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. She knew that now. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said finally, her voice low and steady. "I never wanted you to get involved in any of this, but now that you know, I can't hide the truth anymore." James leaned forward, waiting for her to continue. "The truth is," Alara said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not from here. I was born on a planet far away in a system that's been conquered by a ruthless alien empire. They control everything, our lives, our freedom, our future. I escaped when I was just a child, and I've been on the run ever since." James sat back, stunned. The reality of what she was saying hit him like a ton of bricks. "The food, it's for them, isn't it?" he asked. Alara nodded. "Yes, the aliens I meet with, they're refugees just like me. They escaped the Empire's control. They need food and supplies to survive. And I've been helping them for as long as I can." James felt his mind spinning. An alien empire? Refugees? He never could have imagined something so vast, so dangerous, was right under his nose. He looked at Alara, his thoughts racing. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and concern. "I couldn't," she said, her voice breaking. "If I had, you would have been in danger. The Empire has spies everywhere. They would have found out, and then they would have come after you." "I couldn't risk that." James paused, absorbing everything she had said. This was bigger than any business deal or office crisis. The stakes were life and death. His world was suddenly more complicated than he could ever have imagined. And he was in the middle of it. James sat in silence, trying to process everything Alara had just shared with him. His thoughts raced, his mind spinning in circles. The reality of what she had said seemed impossible, like something out of a science fiction movie. But here she was, sitting across from him, eyes wide and filled with worry, revealing the truth about her past. An alien empire, refugees, and an entire intergalactic struggle that he had never even imagined. This was all happening right under his nose. He had always thought of himself as someone who had control over his life, someone who understood the world around him. But now, everything had changed. The calm, predictable life he had built in his high-rise apartment was now a distant memory. "Are you saying the Empire has been watching you this whole time?" James finally asked, his voice low and hesitant. He still couldn't wrap his mind around it. "And they're watching me now?" Alara nodded, her eyes sad. "Yes, they know everything. Their reach is everywhere. They have spies on every planet. They can find anyone, no matter where they hide." James rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. The whole situation was too much to take in. "So, you've been helping these refugees all along. And now you've dragged me into this mess, haven't you?" Alara shook her head quickly. "I never wanted to involve you. I never planned for you to get caught up in it. You've been kind to me, James. I didn't want you to be in danger. But I'm running out of time. And I need your help." James stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deceit. But there was nothing. Her fear was genuine. Her desperation was real. He could see it in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she gripped the arms of the chair. "Help you with what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What exactly do you need from me?" Alara hesitated, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "The Empire is closing in. They've tracked me down to this planet, and they're getting closer. If they find me, they'll destroy me, and anyone who's helped me. I've been hiding for so long, but now they're onto me." James felt a chill run down his spine. The reality of the situation was becoming clearer by the second. Alara wasn't just a maid caught in a bad situation. She was part of a larger, dangerous struggle. She had been running for her life, and now the Empire was closing in on her. "What do you need from me, Alara?" James repeated more urgently this time. He wasn't sure if he was ready to get involved in something this dangerous, but the idea of leaving her alone, trapped and scared, didn't sit well with him. "I need your help to move the refugees," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "They can't stay here. The Empire is too close. We need to get them off this planet before it's too late, but I can't do it alone." James blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected her to ask for help with something so huge. He thought maybe she needed him to hide her for a while or to help her find a way to disappear. But this was different. She was asking him to help smuggle refugees across the galaxy. "I can't do that," James said, shaking his head. "I don't know anything about this kind of thing. I'm just a guy with a regular job. I can't be involved in something like this." "I know," Alara said softly, her eyes filled with regret. "But you're my only option. I don't know anyone else here, and I trust you." James looked at her, his mind racing. This was insane, but there was something in her eyes, something in her voice that made him want to help. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way she had always been there, taking care of him in ways he hadn't even noticed. Or maybe it was just the realization that he couldn't walk away now, not after everything she had told him. "Alara, James started, but before he could finish, a loud knock on the door interrupted him. Both he and Alara froze. The knock was sharp, authoritative. There was no mistaking it. Someone was outside, and they weren't here for a friendly visit. James stood up quickly, his heart racing. He looked at Alara, who was already on her feet, her eyes wide with fear. Without saying a word, she moved swiftly to the door and peered through the peephole. "They're here," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. "They've found me." James' stomach sank. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The Empire had arrived, and they weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take her no, to take both of them. Alara turned to him, her face pale. "We need to leave, now." Before James could react, the door shook again, this time with more force. The sound of pounding fists echoed through the apartment. He could hear voices from the other side, speaking in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable, demanding, commanding, and filled with malice. He grabbed Alara by the arm. "We can't just run. We need a plan, we need—" "There's no time," she interrupted, her voice frantic. "We have to go or we're both dead." James glanced around the apartment, his mind working at a frantic pace. There was no time to think clearly, no time to plan. The only option was to act. "Alara, where do we go? How do we get out of here?" he asked, his voice low and hurried. "You've been on the run for so long. How do you do it? How do you hide?" She met his gaze, her expression hardening with determination. "I've been hiding in plain sight. But the Empire won't stop until they find me. I need to move the refugees, and the only way to do that is to leave Earth. There's a place, hidden in the outskirts of the galaxy, where the Empire can't reach us. I've made contact with others who can help." James didn't fully understand what she was saying, but he knew one thing: if they stayed here, they were dead. There was no choice but to trust her. "Alara, how do we get to this place? What do we need to do?" "We'll need to get to the docks," she said quickly. "There's a ship waiting for us, but it's not like any ship you've ever seen. She paused, looking over at him with a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "It's not human." James' heart skipped a beat. What was she saying? An alien ship. He had barely begun to comprehend that Alara was from another world, and now she was telling him they would be escaping on an alien ship. "Are you saying we're going to space?" he asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "Yes," she said firmly, "and you're going with me." Before he could say anything more, the door burst open. James turned to see two figures step inside, tall, armored beings with sharp, angular features and dark, unblinking eyes. They weren't human, and they weren't friendly. The alien soldiers didn't waste time. One of them spoke in a deep, cold voice, ordering Alara to surrender. "Come with us, traitor," the soldier said. "Your escape ends now." James' mind raced as Alara's face went pale. There was no more time. The decision had been made for them. He grabbed her hand and ran toward the window, pulling her with him. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice steady despite the panic he felt inside. Together, they scrambled to open the window, the sounds of the aliens' heavy footsteps getting closer. James didn't know what they were running toward or how they were going to escape, but one thing was certain: There was no going back now. The night air felt cold against James's skin as he yanked the window open with more force than he intended. He didn't know how much time they had left before the aliens barged into the apartment, but it wouldn't be long. The sound of their boots echoed louder in the hall as they moved closer, and James's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at Alara, whose face was pale but resolute. "We need to move now," she whispered urgently. James nodded, his mind racing. The alien soldiers were right behind them. There was no time to waste. The window led out to a narrow fire escape which stretched across the side of the building. James had never been good with heights, but he didn't have a choice. He took a deep breath and climbed out first, carefully placing his feet on the metal rungs of the fire escape. Alara followed him quickly, her movements swift and sure, as if she had done this 100 times before. They moved in silence, their footsteps quiet on the old metal steps, but the weight of their situation pressed on James's mind. He didn't know how far they had to go or where this escape route would lead them, but it was their only option. At the bottom of the fire escape, they reached the alleyway. James could hear the distant sound of sirens, but he couldn't tell if it was the authorities or the Empire's forces arriving. Either way, it didn't matter. They were running out of time. Alara grabbed his arm and pulled him towards the street. "This way," she said, her voice sharp and focused. She led him down a few more alleyways, darting in and out of shadows, her eyes always scanning the area. They moved fast, but Alara's calmness seemed to reassure James. If she had been running from the Empire this long, she must have known what she was doing. They reached a hidden entrance at the edge of the city, an old, run-down building that looked abandoned. Alara pushed open the door and they stepped inside. The air inside was cooler, damp, and smelled faintly of mildew. The building was dark, with only the light from the street filtering through cracks in the walls. "This is it," Alara whispered, looking over her shoulder at James. "The ship is waiting. We don't have much time." James didn't have the faintest idea what kind of ship they were talking about, but he didn't care. He just needed to get away from the aliens chasing them, and if this was their only chance, he would take it. The two of them moved quickly through the building, Alara leading the way as she navigated the maze of corridors. There was an unsettling quiet, but James couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every corner they turned, every door they passed, made him feel more and more on edge. Alara stopped in front of a large, rusted door. She pressed a small panel beside it, and with a hiss, the door slid open. James stepped inside, and his eyes went wide as he took in the sight before him. The room they had entered was cavernous, and in the center of it stood a large ship, nothing like anything James had ever seen. The ship was sleek and dark, its surface reflecting the dim light around it. Its shape was unlike any human technology James had ever encountered, smooth, curving lines with shimmering metallic surfaces that seemed to shift in the light. It looked like something out of a dream or a nightmare, depending on how you looked at it. "It's beautiful," James said without thinking, his voice filled with awe. Alara gave him a quick, nervous glance. "It's not like anything you've ever seen, I know. It's not human technology. It's not even from this galaxy." The thought of traveling to a place so far from Earth sent a chill through James's spine. He had always imagined space as something vast and unknowable, but this was real now. This wasn't some science fiction movie, this was happening to him and he was part of it. "Where's the crew?" James asked, looking around the empty hangar. "They'll be here soon," Alara said, her voice tight. "I've made arrangements, but they're cautious. They won't show up until we're sure it's safe." James felt the weight of her words. He had no idea who they were or why Alara trusted them, but he knew he had no other choice. He had to go with her, no matter how strange or terrifying the situation had become. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the entrance. James's heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was coming. They had to move, and fast. Alara turned to him, panic flashing in her eyes. "We need to get on board now." They ran towards the ship, but before they could reach the entrance, a voice echoed through the building. "You think you can escape us, traitor?" It was the same cold voice from earlier, the alien soldier who had come for Alara. The figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light from the street outside. He was tall and imposing, his eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The other soldier was behind him, and both of them were armed with long, gleaming weapons that hummed with energy. They weren't here to negotiate, they were here to capture them, or worse. Alara didn't hesitate. She grabbed James's arm and pulled him into the ship, slamming the door behind them. There was a sharp hiss as the entrance sealed shut, and the ship began to hum with energy. James could feel the ship's power surging to life, the walls vibrating as it prepared to take off. "Hold on," Elara shouted as she moved to the controls. James barely had time to react before the ship jerked upward, lifting off the ground with surprising speed. The walls around them seemed to stretch and shift as the ship moved, and James's stomach lurched as they rocketed away from the planet's surface. He glanced back through the ship's small viewports, watching as the city they had just escaped from grew smaller and smaller. The buildings blurred into a distant landscape, and soon the planet was just a speck against the endless black of space. James's breath caught in his throat. He had just left Earth. There was no turning back now. The ship stabilized as it reached a higher altitude, and James looked over at Elara. Her hands were steady on the controls, her face focused and serious. For the first time since he had met her, she looked completely in control. "Where are we going?" James asked, his voice trembling despite himself. "We're heading for a safe haven," Elara said, her eyes still locked on the controls. "A place where the Empire can't reach us. It's a hidden world, out of their sight, out of their reach. We'll be safe there." James wasn't sure what to think. He had no idea where they were going or how they were going to survive in a galaxy full of enemies. But right now, he had no choice but to trust her. As the ship accelerated, the stars outside stretched into bright lines, and James felt a strange sense of awe fill him. He had always looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond, but now he was part of it. He was in the middle of something much bigger than himself, something that could change the fate of entire worlds. Elara glanced at him, her expression softening for a brief moment. "Thank you for trusting me," she said quietly. James didn't know how to respond. The words seemed small compared to the enormity of the situation. "I don't really have a choice, do I?" he replied with a nervous laugh. "No," Elara said with a smile, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "But you're here now, and that's all that matters." James didn't say anything more. Instead, he stared out at the vast, infinite expanse of space ahead of them. For the first time in his life, he realized how small he was in the grand scheme of things, and yet he also realized something else. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, he was here. He was part of something much bigger than anything he could have ever imagined. And there was no turning back. The ship moved smoothly through space, its engines humming with a steady rhythm that seemed almost peaceful in contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. James still couldn't quite wrap his mind around the fact that they were leaving Earth. The familiar blue planet had faded into a distant speck, now just another memory, swallowed by the endless black void. He sat in the small passenger compartment, staring out the viewport, watching the stars streak by in blinding lines of light. The silence between him and Elara was heavy, but not uncomfortable. She had taken the controls again after they'd left the atmosphere, her fingers moving with practiced precision over the alien buttons and levers. It was clear she had done this before. James swallowed hard, trying to collect his thoughts. His world had been turned upside down in the span of just a few days. One minute, he had been living a quiet, ordinary life in his high-rise apartment, and the next, he was running for his life with a genetically altered alien who was leading him into an unknown future. He glanced over at Elara, who was still focused on the controls. Her face was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension in her posture. He could sense the weight of the responsibility she was carrying. It wasn't just her life on the line. It was the lives of the refugees she was helping, and possibly the future of entire worlds. "Where are we going?" James finally asked, his voice breaking the silence. He needed to know, he needed answers. Elara didn't look up immediately, but her hands slowed on the controls. "We're heading for a hidden system far from the Empire's reach. A place where they won't be able to find us. It's called Jorkath." "Jorkath?" James repeated, trying to memorize the name. He wasn't sure what he expected, but the way Elara said it made it sound like a place of refuge, a sanctuary. "What is it? A planet? A space station?" "It's both," Elara replied, her voice steady. "It's a world, but also a secret stronghold. The system is isolated far beyond the known borders of the Empire. Only a few people know about it." James nodded slowly, processing the information. "So there are other people there." "Refugees like you?" "Yes," Elara said. The system is home to a group of rebels and their allies. We're all in hiding from the Empire. They've been searching for us for years, but we've kept our location a secret. Jorkath is our last hope." James felt a lump form in his throat. He had no idea what kind of life he had just stepped into. A hidden system, rebels, an alien empire. It all sounded like something from a movie, but the danger he had seen with his own eyes told him this was all too real. And the Empire. "They won't stop looking for you?" he asked, his voice tight. "No," Alara said, her expression darkening. "They'll never stop. The Empire will do whatever it takes to find us. They'll destroy entire planets, wipe out civilizations just to make sure we don't escape." Her words struck James hard. He had known that the Empire was ruthless, but hearing it from her made it feel all too real. The stakes weren't just about Alara's survival. They were about fighting back against an empire that had the power to erase entire species. He didn't know what he could do to help. He wasn't a soldier or a fighter. He was just a man who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but he couldn't turn back now. He had seen too much. He had heard too much. And despite his fear, despite the weight of everything happening, he knew he couldn't abandon Alara. "What's the plan when we get to Jorkath?" James asked. "We'll meet with the leaders of the rebellion," Alara said. "They'll help us. They'll give us a place to hide, a way to fight back." James wasn't sure what kind of fighting back Alara meant, but he knew one thing. If the rebellion was their last hope, it wasn't going to be easy. Alara glanced over at him, as if sensing his unease. "James, I know this is a lot to take in. You didn't ask for any of this, but you've already made a choice by coming with me, and I promise you I won't let you down." "I'm not going anywhere," James said, the words coming out more firmly than he felt. He wasn't sure what was ahead, but he had already committed himself to this. There was no turning back. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt more comfortable. Alara focused on her controls, guiding the ship through the vast emptiness of space. James watched her, his mind still spinning with the enormity of the situation. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into something much bigger than themselves. Hours passed in relative quiet, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound filling the cabin. The stars outside seemed to stretch endlessly, the distance between them and Earth growing with each passing minute. James's eyes grew heavy, the exhaustion of the past few days catching up with him. He had barely slept in the last 24 hours, and the adrenaline of the escape had left him drained. "Alara," he murmured, his voice tired but urgent. "How did you end up with the Empire on your tail in the first place? You said you were just a child when you escaped." "What happened?" Alara's fingers hesitated over the controls, and for a moment the ship seemed to drift slightly off course. She took a deep breath, as if weighing whether to share her story. "It's a long story," she said, her voice distant, as if she were recalling something painful. "I was born on a planet called Celiska in a system far from Earth. My people were once peaceful, isolated from the rest of the galaxy, but then the Empire found us. They're always looking for new resources, new planets to conquer. My home was rich with minerals, and they saw it as a prime target." James listened closely, his curiosity piqued. He knew there had to be more to her story. "The Empire came, and they didn't ask," Alara continued. "They took what they wanted by force. They enslaved my people, mining the planet for everything it had. My family tried to resist, but they were outmatched. The Empire is too powerful. I was just a child when I was taken, but I escaped. It was the only way I could survive. I ended up in a refugee colony, and I've been running ever since." James's heart ached as he listened to Alara's story. He had known that she had been through something terrible, but he hadn't realized the extent of it. She had lost her home, her family, everything she had ever known, and yet she kept going. "I'm sorry," James said quietly, feeling the weight of her pain. "I had no idea." Alara shook her head, her eyes softening. "It's not your fault. I've made peace with it. The only thing that matters now is stopping the Empire from taking more lives, from destroying more worlds." James didn't know what to say. He didn't have the right words to comfort her. He only knew that the Empire was a threat, one that needed to be stopped. And maybe, just maybe, he could help in some way. He wasn't a soldier and he wasn't a hero, but he was here. And for Alara, that had to count for something. He glanced out the window, his mind still racing. They were nearing their destination. The ship's sensors had detected a hidden energy signature up ahead, the entrance to Jorkath. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of hope and fear. The Empire was still out there, hunting them, but they were almost there. As the ship approached the hidden system, James's breath caught in his throat. The stars around them seemed to shift, their light fading as the ship entered a cloaked field. The view through the viewport began to change, and James saw something incredible, an entire new world emerging before his eyes. A vast, hidden planet, with cities nestled beneath its surface and shields that protected it from the Empire's watchful eyes. "This is it," Alara whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and hope. "We made it." For the first time since he had left Earth, James felt something he hadn't felt in days, a glimmer of hope. They were safe, for now.